This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. Hello and welcome to this week's episode, where my guest is watercolour artist Lisa Gardner. Lisa is inspired by the natural world, the connection between breath and brushwork, and rare wild plant species on the edge of extinction. Seemingly far-flung interests that come together in a beautifully natural and synergistic way in Lisa's work. Listen on to find out more.
So my artist name is Iris Hill. Iris Hill is or was my nan, and I work under her name as a tribute to her. So a huge part of my backstory is sort of ode to my nan and the inspiration in creative pursuits and also the encouragement that she gave me. So lots of lovely memories of being in Wickham in Hampshire, which is where my nan and granddad lived, and they were bakers of the village. And so lots of really lovely memories of their beautiful rose garden and growing lots of things, fresh tomatoes, and smells of the cakes from the bakery would come wafting through the garden. So I think in terms of my artistic exploration since then, I'm obsessed with flowers, in particular wildflowers. And I think a huge part of that is because those memories evoke such joyful times for me as a child. Also think that my art and my creativity comes a lot from probably not being encouraged academically. I had a lot of learning support at school, and so painting became somewhere where I found freedom and strength, and that stays with me now. So I think my passion for wildflowers and the love that I have for watercolour painting in particular is something that's been rooted with me for a long time.
And how does nature inform your work? Is it more in the sort of creative process or the final product, or is it all things?
I think there's quite a few layered approaches to it, really. I had sort of a bit of an experience of self-discovery last year where being in nature obviously can be a huge source of inspiration and is, well documented that it's a great thing for your own well-being. But I found that I perhaps had been arriving in natural spaces with this desire to consume it in somehow. So I wanted to be inspired to write a poem. I wanted to document it, photograph it, film it, sit and paint, and I hadn't spent much opportunity just absorbing the landscape that I was in by stillness. So there's lots of ways that I engage with nature now. Sometimes my most recent practice is actually just being in stillness and sitting within a new landscape rather than trying to sort of be inspired by it instantly. So I love to walk, I love to be, and I love to paint out in nature. Also, I think I find a lot of comfort in nature because there seems to be like a real purposeful chaos to it. And as somebody who, naturally I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so being out in nature and seeing how all the broken bits, all the tangled bits, all the bits that are decaying, I find a lot of comfort in that there's actually, everything's evolving and moving and changing all of the time. So I see quite a lot of sort of life's lessons just by sitting and watching plants grow.
Well, I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's like sometimes, we try and absorb everything and express it straight away, but it's the processing and it's the sitting in nature and it's experience and the passage of time and life cycles and all the rest of it. But do you actually use natural products literally in your work as well as being inspired by it?
Yeah, absolutely. Something that I absolutely love doing is creating natural inks. So ethically going out and foraging often things that have fallen from the trees and are on the ground, and sort of finding those little gems, those treasures, and sort of feeling like an oak gall in your hand or like a bramble and wondering what colour they're going to produce, and then coming home and boiling them up in the pot. It obviously doesn't always smell that great. But yeah, to see kind of colour start to descend out into the pot from whatever natural material you have, and then turning that into an ink is just, it's really, really wonderful to see how that can then come out on the page.
Does that sometimes happen in unexpected ways? Because I've got a very limited experience with natural dyeing, but I know sometimes that the actual source material doesn't resemble the finished product in some
Oh,
instances.
all the time. Yeah, absolutely all the time. I'm a real experimental phase with that, which I love. So often it depends, sometimes I'll add a bit of salt or white vinegar or a bit of rust water, and that will change the colors again. So you can often have one material that makes a variety of different colors depending of what you put with it. So it's really fun, really, really fun, really playful, and it helps add to that real exploratory way that I love to work. And again, it is another layer of process to my pieces, but also just generally to me as an artist. It's part of that kind of always seeking, always being curious. That's a real lovely tactile way to do that.
And I think also I'm right in saying that you actually conserve nature through your work, don't you? How do you do that?
A huge thing that I've been on, which just been the most wonderful experience. I was Plantlife, an international plant and fungi charities artist in residence, and I had the most joyful year traveling around the UK to IPA sites, which are important plant area sites, and meeting some of the rarest wild flowers. Those are on the brink of extinction. And I really found this lovely connection between myself and Plantlife, where they have this such an important message and they're doing such important work. And they're looking for ways on how they can connect people feeling and emotion to the stories of these flowers in these wild plants. So art for me is just such a great way to present that really meaningful work in a new way for the audience to explore it in a different way. So connecting like the emotional side, the emotional threads of people through art to the cause of the environment, and why it's so important that we save and protect and nurture our wild landscapes.
So was that about documenting the plants, or was it more about, like you said, drawing attention to them?
A bit of both, really. So I'm not an accurate artist. I work against being a perfectionist. So I do note and notice the makings up of a plant, but I'm very free flowing with my work. I really embrace the water element of my painting. I find that an incredibly cathartic and releasing experience to be really free with my painting. So it was recording what's there, but also sort of making the tiniest of wildflowers and painting them massive. I did some pieces which are like 2 by 2.5 meters, like absolutely huge, and sort of making those micro plants macro and really giving them a sounding board and creating interest and intrigue as to, what is this? What am I looking at? And presenting it in that way. So I've been invited with Plantlife to go to Westminster. It was supposed to be in July, but now because of the election, it's been postponed slightly till later in the year. And Plantlife are bringing a wildflower meadow to Westminster to discuss the possibility of a grassland action plan. There's one already in place for woodland and peatland, but there's not one in place for grassland. And it's really important for our environment that we have like a robust protection plan in place, and that we have some action in place to restore our grasslands, because they're a huge source of carbon storage and kind of an untapped source, really. So with all of that, it's just really interesting for me as an artist to see how I can support those messages and help make change. So they've invited me to showcase pieces of the work for politicians so that they can see and experience the plants in a different way. So it's not all, something that's written down. It's something that's colourful, vibrant, energetic, that kind of evokes a feeling or an emotion. I also write poetry as well. So it's been a really lovely way for me to be able to draw on my poetry and present that back as well. So the arts can have such an impact with really important messages. And it's a lovely way to connect people and places together.
Did you just concentrate on one specific plant at a time, or did you also do more landscapes or groups of plants?
It was really quite plant specific. So on a lot of the trips, I had a specific plant to go and seek out or to go and find. And that was just the most fun thing going on these expeditions. And some of these plants and flowers were so tiny that even with the experts around me, you really had to tune in to be able to see them. And then suddenly you get your eye in, and then they'd almost like reveal themselves to you like they were all there all along, but you couldn't see it at first. It's almost like they were deciding whether you were worthy of seeing them or not. So that was just the most fun, going out to meet like individual species. And a lot of them were part of a project called Species on the Edge, which means they're on the edge of extinction, but also on the edge of cliffs. So we spent a lot of time crawling along on our bellies, hanging over the edge of cliffs to try and find these particular species. But it doesn't always have to be species specific. I was also going to wildflower meadows, for example, Five Head Arable Field, which is an arable field in Somerset, but also Jones Hill Farm, which was a wildflower meadow, and Ranscombe Farm as well, which is a flagship site for Plantlife. And there was so many different varieties and species, and you could spend hours and hours there and only just to sort of scratch the surface and uncover a few at a time. So sometimes, it can be a bit overwhelming when you come to places, because you want to kind of, you see it all, you sense it all. So sometimes I find sort of focusing on one species at a time quite calming, and actually doing a little project at the moment called One Petal at a Time, because I even found sometimes doing a flower at a time was too much. So I stripped it right back to keep it nice and simple, and really sort of zoom in and focus for myself on just one petal at a time.
Yeah, I was thinking then, was there anything that you kind of thought, oh, well, I'm really familiar with that plant and I'm not that excited about tracking it down, but then when you started to look more closely at it, you kind of taken a bit by surprise?
Oh my gosh, all the time, all the time. I think it's quite interesting, and was a real lesson for me. Like, you can be sent a photo of something and you think, "Oh, okay, that's pretty. It's, attractive looking flower." But when you meet certain species, it is like you kind of get to know them, and because of the environment they're in. And there, in particular, there was a species called the purple oxytropis, and I've got the best memories of being in the presence of that plant. The way that it grew, it's got like it's almost like it's got arms that kind of reach out, and then in their hands, it's like these purple and pink jewels are sort of stuffed between the fingers of the plant, almost reaching up towards the sun. And I've just thought that was the most spectacular species. But I'd seen images of it before in advance, and was like, okay, well, we'll go along and see. But when you actually are in its presence, and again, you kind of get your hand lens out so you can zoom in and really absorb yourself with that one species, and give it the time that it deserves. Those were, yeah, the really kind of freeing experiences for me of meeting something in specific, like a specific species.
Did you get to see anything that was particularly rare?
Yeah, Scottish primrose, which is tiny, and it's like almost like the most perfect looking flower. It almost looks like a Lego flower. Like the I think it's got like five heart-shaped petals. It's like this bright, vibrant pink with like a sunshiny yellow center, and they're really small. Like the actual flowers are, about, I think, about a centimeter across, something like that. And it only grows on the northern coast of Scotland and in Orkney. And so if it disappears from there, then it's gone forever. So that felt really special, to be able to be in the presence of something that was such an iconic flower, but also, very concerning to know that they need to be protected because they are so rare.
And when you embarked on the project, did somebody say to you, okay, well, there are this many species we'd like you to cover? Or was it just more a kind of, this is what we find along the way, and you're given more freedom in terms of what you produced in the end?
A mixture of both, really. Like, it was a real I think what was the best thing about the project, working with the charity, was that we both were very open to see what would happen and where the project would lead. There was a very, very rough skeleton outline, but really it was the enthusiasm of the staff. I was able to go to their staff conference and present to the whole staff team that, I was just really enthusiastic, probably massively naive, but had a bag full of paints and paper and wanted to see what would happen. And it was the enthusiasm of certain staff just really understanding the power that the arts can have to connect a message, but also for things like their resources to use on a website, to use on a product, to engage people into wanting to have something that's nice. It can really, there's multiple layers in which a work of art can support what the charity are trying to do. So it's really enthusiasm and understanding of staff seeing the potential, really. And then we just kind of went on all these adventures and these trips, and there was a film that was made along the way as well, which is just great now because looking back, it's so nice to have something to kind of reflect on at the end of the project.
It's really cool because you've got this amazing body of work and it is beautiful. But in the process, it sounds as if you had an amazing time making it. And there's that kind of joy that comes through from you when you're talking about the process and, the experience of it. And I wondered if you feel that your work benefits kind of mental health and well-being and the whole process of engaging in art and producing it, whether that does the same. Do you feel that? And if so, how do you think that feeds into that more anchored way of being and bringing you joy through your actions and productivity?
It's a huge part of my own personal mental health. I love a process called intuitive painting. I paint every day just for at least 5 minutes. Often, I try to have no idea of an outcome. It's purely the feeling of creating something. And there's a technique I love to play with called breathe with your brush. So I'm hugely a massive advocate of the power of breath. We all breathe, but how we breathe is really important. And then the knock-on effect for a really good deep breath for the rest of your body and all the systems. So I have quite a meditational approach to my personal painting practice where I bring in breath and brush together. So one deep breath, one brush mark. And again, invite the water element of the watercolour to flow through. So it's a massive shift for me, the before and after, just such a simple, short practice. So I love to work in that way. And then a massive sort of outcome of the whole project in terms of me as an artist was being able to access poetry and words, but also having the confidence to paint really big, which is something because I'd always wanted to do. So when I'm painting big, you can put your breath, you can put your whole body, your movement into creating something as well. And it just feels like, often afterwards you can feel kind of elated, but also quite tired because it's quite an energetic giving over to the canvas and like a trust in yourself and your intuition. So my own painting and writing is absolutely integral to my own well-being. I love to teach as well. And I that's something, the process we've talked about, but absorbing yourself in the process and removing kind of any pressure on expectations of the outcome is a lot easier said than done. But the breathwork practice is a really freeing way of doing that. And I love watching those epiphany moments with students when they feel like they're fully absorbed in the work and not worrying about if anyone's going to like it or not, which can often be a bit of a barrier for anyone picking up a paintbrush in the first place, and myself included. We all get caught up in people and ourselves, more importantly, judging something that we do too harshly. So yeah, massively important for my own mental health. It's definitely the many tools that I call upon to make myself feel calm, feel grounded, a whole jukebox of different emotions.
And when you first started speaking about your childhood memories, it made me think that, there was an element of nostalgia. And I don't think times were necessarily simpler, but maybe when you are in childhood, you experience them on a more simple level and things are less complicated. And also talking about the breath work and how that kind of slows down your movement and how what comes out of you is more free. Do you think that approach to art and the way that you come at it means that you produce a particular style? Could you imagine any other style coming out given the situations that produced it?
Oh, absolutely. I used to have a flatmate years ago, and she almost would say that there's several different painting personalities that would come out. One we called the Grinch. I was having a bad day. So I think there's definitely like, it is a huge emotional release for me, and my paintings can vary greatly. Often there's about 10 Grinches before I get something that I feel is grounded and calm and that free flowing element to it. There's, for any one painting I show, there's often probably about 30 paintings beforehand, which is where I love to show. When I do exhibit, I love to show the process too. So I love to show sketchbooks and journals and the little paintings that build up to like what we kind of deem sometimes a final piece. But personally, I find the process of any artists and like looking at their backstory so much more interesting often than the end result. I think it's I've just personally always got to keep that curiosity and that intrigue and that interest and that experimental approach to my work. I think I feel like I'm always striving for something, but I don't quite know what it is. But the joy is really in the process for me.
I guess the more you practice it, the more you will hone that ability to free yourself up, I suppose. And with that in mind, how do you think your work might evolve in the future?
I think the more that I trust myself and my work, perhaps the bigger it will become. I'm really loving the evolution of the written word with my paintings at the moment, and really sort of expressing what it is I want to say to the world, and what sharing what I think is important. So protecting our environment is a huge thing that's very important to me personally. And if my work can be a voice for that, standing up and speaking is one thing, but being able to really express yourself through my paintings and perhaps some short films or some poetry, photography even, so multimedia approach. But whatever platform I would love my work to really express that kind of amazingness of the natural world, but also why it's so important that we stand up, speak up, and protect it as much as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So if people wanted to find out more about your work, where would they go?
My website is irishill.co.uk, and on there is the stories and the sharing of the film from the project with Plantlife. I love to teach, so there's also workshop opportunities on there as well. But yes, please do connect. I'm also on Instagram at Iris Hill.
Thank you very much to Lisa for a fascinating look into her creative process, and thank you as well for listening. If you like this interview, I recommend checking out episode 86 about garden sculpture, released on the 25th of February 2020, and episode 63, Plants as Art, released on the 3rd of September 2019. You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.